I want to ask you a question this morning that can actually shape how you view all of life. Whether you're facing good times right now or bad times, wherever you are in life, what would you do today if you absolutely knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that God was with you? How would that change things? What would look different? What would you do differently if you knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that God was with you? See, when you're truly confident that God is with you, it changes things. As a matter of fact, it changes everything. We're talking about what it means to have big faith in God, and I wonder what would happen if before every major decision, every action, every reaction, you paused and acknowledged God's presence in your life today. How would that look? What would that mean? What if you lived like God is right there beside you, right there with you, just as He promised He would be every step of the way? I mean, it could be the lens through which you filter every decision, every opportunity, every need, every relationship, every circumstance of your life. I mean, it's the question that you could keep front and center, and if you do it, it has the power to bring all of life into proper perspective. What would you do if you knew that God was with you? It changes everything when I think about my circumstances and when I look at my circumstances through the lens of my faith in God, instead of looking at God through the lens of my circumstances. See, what we tend to do sometimes is we put our circumstances between us and God, and that changes our perspective versus putting God between us and our circumstances. We've been studying this Old Testament hero by the name of Joseph, and Joseph's life story is in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis. And primarily we read about him in Genesis 39 through 41, and his is a story of extremes. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. He has extreme circumstances, extreme prosperity, extreme persecution, extreme opportunity, and extreme power. I mean, Joseph probably had more challenges in his life than you or I will ever have in a lifetime. Joseph probably had more wealth and prosperity than you or I will ever experience. He had more opportunity than any of us could ever hope for. And somehow Joseph was able to maintain an incredible attitude and amazing faith in the midst of overwhelming and extreme conditions that confronted his life. Last week we found out that life was really rough for Joseph at one time. His 10 older brothers threw him in a well, and they were going to leave him there to die because they were jealous. Joseph was his father Jacob's favorite son. And you'll recall that the plans of the brothers changed when they saw a way to make a little extra spending money, and maybe they could also keep their conscience at least somewhat clear. They decided it would be a lot more compassionate to sell their brother to a traveling band of merchants as a slave instead of leaving him there in the well where they'd left him to die. See this compassion that overflows with these brothers. They went on to lie to their father, telling him that Joseph had been killed by a wild animal, and the Bible tells us that Jacob, he wept uncontrollably at the thought that his son Joseph, his favorite son, was gone. And little did he know that Joseph wasn't gone. It's just that these merchants had taken him to Egypt, where he was sold as a slave. Joseph was quickly one of these guys that earned favor wherever he went. He climbed right up the ladder. He was encountering some very positive things in Potiphar's house. You know, he was a servant in Potiphar's household. Potiphar's a high-ranking official in Egypt, and Joseph is, gaining great favor with him, but he's still, not a person that's out on his own. He's not doing what he wants to do. He's not with his family, but he's earned this great trust in Egypt. He's been given great responsibility, and that is until Potiphar's wife, this guy Joseph was working for, framed Joseph for doing something that he didn't do, and he was thrown into prison. He was not tried fairly. He was convicted of a crime he didn't commit. But he's there in prison, and there again, Joseph earns the favor of the prison guard, and he's given responsibility in the prison, even though he was still a prisoner himself. And that is where we left him last week. And last week, his situation's looking pretty hopeless. Doesn't look good for Joseph. It's a bad scene. Now, what's so amazing throughout this story, we brought this up last week, one recurring phrase keeps surfacing. just a 5-word phrase that keeps showing up in Joseph's story. The phrase doesn't seem to fit the rest of the story at all. Do you remember the phrase? And God was with Joseph, absolutely. We see that phrase show up, especially in Genesis 39, and it sure didn't look like God was with Joseph. I mean, when the Lord is with you, aren't good things supposed to happen? I mean, when the Lord is with you, surely you're not going to be forsaken by your family, right? I mean, that doesn't make sense. When the Lord is with you, you shouldn't get thrown into an empty well and be left for dead. When the Lord is with you, you're certainly not going to be sold into slavery. I mean, that sounds ridiculous. I mean, that can't happen. And if the Lord is with you, surely there's no false implications or accusations or imprisonment in your future. Doesn't that sound like what should happen to somebody when the Lord's not with them? That doesn't sound like what happens when the Lord is with somebody. But as we discovered last week, those things actually can happen even when the Lord is with you. Because that is what happened to Joseph. And his response to all of this was to consistently live his life with integrity. That's because Joseph had big faith in a big God. That's why we're studying his story. He is a story of consistency and character and integrity. It's an amazing story. Joseph had big faith in a big God. He didn't allow his circumstances to skew his view of God. Now, today, Joseph's story is going to do a full 180. His life is about to turn around from extreme trials and tribulations to extreme opportunity, to extreme wealth, to extreme power. I mean, we've seen how Joseph responded to being abandoned and imprisoned. Now we're going to see how he responds and reacts to success. I mean, I think we can learn about how we should live even when we're surrounded by blessings and potential and opportunity like so many of us are. I want you to see how we're to live according to Joseph, because here's the thing: wealth and prosperity, even more than poverty and need, can pull us away from our faith in God. I want you to think about that for just a minute. Think about the fact that wealth and prosperity, even more than poverty and need, can pull us away from our faith in God. That's because when we're in need, we are more inclined to pray. Wouldn't you agree with that? I mean, when we're in need, we pray. When we have everything we need, we tend not to pray. We kind of operate in our own strength and in our own power. We go our own way. We do our own thing. But when we're in need, we pray. When we're not in need, when we have everything we need, we tend not to pray. Here's what I want you to see about Joseph. You want to jot this down. Joseph did not allow prosperity to erode his faith in God. It's something we all must guard against. I mean, in fact, all the good things that came his way, Joseph depended even more faithfully on his God. He didn't allow prosperity to erode his faith in God. Let's get back to his story, and I'll set the stage. It's Genesis chapter 40. We see some new prisoners being introduced into Joseph's ward in the prison. And these aren't your standard run-of-the-mill prisoners, okay? These guys are not two of the good old boys. They are Pharaoh's former cupbearer and chief baker that are coming into the prison system. These are some high-up people. These guys have worked in the palace. These guys have known the man. They've been with the man, Pharaoh, day in and day out. And a little while into serving their sentence, they both have some very vivid dreams on the same night, and both of them wake up troubled by the fact that they aren't sure what these dreams mean. And they don't know who can help figure it out. I mean, they want answers. What's this all about? But who can we talk to? Who can we ask? And so Joseph, he sees these guys are upset, and so he sat down to chat with them, and he assures them, hey, God can interpret these dreams for you guys. This is no big thing. God's got it. Let me talk to you. Tell me the story. And so Joseph listens carefully to the dreams of the cupbearer and the baker. They sometimes shared responsibilities. Guys help each other out. And so he listens, they tell him the story, and so the cupbearer, he's happy because his story is going to end well. He's going back to work. I mean, that's what Joseph tells him. He says, you're going to be restored to your position. It's good news for you. But then he looked at the baker, and then the music in the background went, no, 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 no. And he says, hey, guess what? Good news and bad news. Good news, you're not going to have to go back to work. Bad news, you're a goner. You're going to be taken out and killed. And so it was a bad scene, but here's the deal. Both realities came true just a few short days later. And so as the cupbearer was getting ready to be released from prison, he's got all of his stuff and they're getting ready to send him out the door. Hey, Joseph, man, thanks for helping me out. Thanks for interpreting the dream. It came true. I love it. I appreciate it. Thank you, brother. And Joseph says, well, you know what? Could I ask you a favor? As you're getting out of here and you're going back to work with Pharaoh and you're going to see him every day, when you get back to him, could you do me a favor? Could you just put in a good word for your brother Joseph down here in the prison cell? Could you speak to Pharaoh on my behalf and help me get out of this prison? Seems like a reasonable request. And so the cupbearer promised that he would remember Joseph. But once he got back to his former life, once he's back in the groove, the cupbearer forgot all about Joseph, who was still sitting there in prison. And so I want you to think about this and put yourself in Joseph's sandals. He's sitting there. 2 long years would pass before the cupbearer would ever think of Joseph again. 2 years Joseph spent waiting for something, anything to change in his life. Now keep in mind, Joseph was a teenager when he showed up in Egypt. He's 17 years old when he got there, approximately. Now he's 30. But things are about to change for Joseph because Pharaoh had a dream of his own. And the cupbearer heard about this dream, and so he says, hey, I all of a sudden remember something I should have told you a couple of years ago. There's this guy. His name's Joseph. He's down at the prison. I had a dream like you just had. He interpreted my dream. It came true. Same thing for the baker. Didn't turn out so well for him, but I think you might want to check with him. Since this is Family Worship Sunday, we thought the kids might like to hear the rest of this story from a little different perspective. I think the parents might like it too, so I want you to take a look at the story of Joseph here on the screen.
Joseph stood at the barred window of his prison cell, staring out into the busy streets of Egypt's greatest city. Now, even though he had done nothing wrong, he had been sold into slavery by his own brothers, and then, after years of excellent work, had been lied about and thrown into prison. 2 years before, Pharaoh's drink taster had promised to get Joseph out of jail after Joseph told him the meaning of a dream, but the man had forgotten.
What if I'm stuck in here for the rest of my life?
Taking a deep breath, Joseph left the window and went about his daily tasks. The jailer had put him in charge of all the other prisoners, but still, Joseph couldn't leave.
Joe! Hey, Joe! Don't worry, I made sure to get rid of the flour with bugs in it. Oh, forget about that. You need a shower.
What?
Plus a shave and haircut.
Why?
Because you can't go before Pharaoh with your head looking like a bird's nest.
Wait, Pharaoh?
Oh, he's asking for you.
Me?
Pharaoh had some cray-cray dreams, and that drink taster who got sprung up out of here a couple years ago finally remembered about you.
So Pharaoh wants me?
Oh, stop yammering. Here, take my razor.
In no time at all, Joseph had cleaned up and was ushered into Pharaoh's huge throne room.
Oh, this wide open space.
Oh, but if God doesn't tell me the meaning of Pharaoh's dream, I'll be back in jail, or worse. Pharaoh and all his officials studied the young man standing before them.
I had 2 dreams last night, but not one of my wise men can tell me what they mean. I've heard you can explain dreams.
I can't do it.
Send him back.
But God will give you an answer. Pharaoh settled back down on his throne, still skeptical.
All right. We'll see what your God can do.
Tell me your dreams, please.
I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and 7 fat cows came up out of the river. They started eating the grass, but then 7 skinny cows came out of the water. They ate up the fat cows, but they were still skinny.
Though Joseph was listening to Pharaoh, he was also listening to God.
Okay, cows who want to eat more beef. What about the second dream? I saw 7 full heads of grain, but then 7 thin, dried out heads of grain came up and swallowed the full heads of grain. Then I woke up.
Joseph took a deep breath. God had given him the meaning of the dreams. Now he must tell Pharaoh, no matter what Pharaoh might do to him.
Your dreams both mean the same thing. God is showing you there will be 7 years with plenty of food in Egypt. Most excellent.
But after that, 7 more years will come when there won't be enough food and terrible hunger will destroy the land.
Most unexcellent.
Pharaoh glowered at Joseph, as if he could change the dream's meaning with a glare.
But now you know, you can do something about it. Choose a wise man and put him in charge of gathering food while there's lots of it. He can store it up. Then, during the time there's no food, the people won't go hungry.
A most excellent plan. Pharaoh turned to his officials.
The Spirit of God is in this man. He's best for the job, right?
Pharaoh waved his arm and beckoned Joseph closer.
I'm putting you in charge of the whole land of Egypt.
Me?
Here, take my ring with the official stamp. Someone find this man linen robes and a gold chain, and get him set up with one of those new 1829 BC chariots. Gold rims, the works.
Within a single day, Joseph had risen from prisoner to the second most important person in Egypt. At Pharaoh's request, Joseph traveled all over the land gathering extra food.
Why do you think Pharaoh listened to Joseph? I mean, when you stop and think about it, I imagine it's because Pharaoh saw something in Joseph that the prison warden saw in Joseph, and that Potiphar saw in Joseph, and the cupbearer and the baker saw in Joseph as well. They saw in Joseph a security and a confidence that caused them to take notice of his life. They saw Joseph's big faith, and it changed everything because Joseph consistently lived his life like God was always with him. Joseph admitted he couldn't provide the interpretation for Pharaoh's dream. I mean, Pharaoh's looking for an answer, but Joseph said, I can't do it. Did you notice? I can't do what you're asking for. But then he quickly said, but God can. But God can provide the answer. And Joseph was living like God was with him in that moment. And my question to you is, wouldn't you like to live like that? I mean, wouldn't you like to live with that faith and that confidence that God is with you? Because the reality is you can. It's a matter of developing deeper faith and bigger faith in God. It's about trusting Him completely each and every day that you live. It's about having full confidence in God, remembering that God has promised to always be there and to remember that He can be trusted. I mean, when you live like that, who should intimidate us? When you live like that, what do you have to fear? I mean, why leave your faith in God at home or at church? Why not take it with you wherever you go 24/7, 365? Check out what happens in Genesis 41:38. It says, so Pharaoh asked his officials, can we find anyone else like this man so obviously filled with the Spirit of God? I mean, think about it. It's quite likely that the guys standing around in the room that day or sitting on their thrones, they were working their way up through the ranks in Egypt. They're looking for a promotion. They're thinking this could be their moment if they can just tell Pharaoh what he wants to hear. And these are guys Pharaoh's no doubt known for years. They've been around him. They've advised him on everything coming and going. And Joseph shows up and interprets these dreams. And then they were surely thinking, hey, okay, Joseph, step aside. We'll take it from here. But God had another plan. And I want you to see it in Genesis 41:39. It says, Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one as intelligent or as wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Remember last week? In one afternoon, Joseph's life changed forever. Just one afternoon. He was walking over a hill, whistling as he went, and the next thing you know, he's thrown in a cistern, abandoned by his family, sold into slavery, all in a single day. Couldn't see that coming. There was no way to see that coming when he got up that morning. And now here he is again, 13 years later. Everything, and I mean everything, changed for Joseph in a single afternoon. He went from a lowly prison cell to being appointed Prime Minister of Egypt. He's not even Egyptian. He may walk like an Egyptian. He may talk like an Egyptian, and I'm fighting it. I'm fighting it. But he's not even Egyptian. Man, everybody and their brother would be a more logical choice for this position than Joseph from a human perspective. But God chose Joseph, and Joseph knew that God was with him. And the thing I love about Joseph is not only did he know that God was with him, Joseph knew God was with him and he lived like it. He acted like it. It made a difference in the way that he lived. Now, I'm going to ask you this. Could a story like this happen? It did. I mean, this is not some kind of a fable that we're talking about here. This is a true story of a real person who lived 4,000 years ago. These are real people. This was a real family. And these accurately documented historical facts tell us a story so that we can see what it's like to have big faith in a big God each and every day, just like Joseph did. In poverty and in prosperity, Joseph was the same. I mean, it's difficult for us to live each day like God is with us when we don't need anything. It's hard to realize your need to depend completely on Him when you're doing okay all by yourself. But here's the thing, the test of prosperity is passed by far fewer people than the test of poverty, the test of adversity, the test of need. One of the things you'll notice is lots of people become Christians in prison. But you don't see them lining up to become Christians on Wall Street. Why is that? See, lots of people look to God when the bottom falls out. They feel like they have nowhere else left to turn. But it is hard to find the man or woman who is willing to bend their knee before the Lord and honor Him when things are going great. And that's because prosperity, and this is a hazard for all of us, prosperity works against our sense of dependence. Prosperity works against our sense of dependence. I mean, how do you live like God is with you when you have everything you want and you have everything you need? I'll tell you how Joseph did it. He did it by admitting the truth. By admitting the truth, he went public. Joseph goes before Pharaoh, and Pharaoh says, hey, let's have this interpretation. And Joseph admitted the truth. He said, I can't, but God can. Joseph publicly declared in what had to be an intimidating environment that Pharaoh, I want you to understand, this is all about God. This is not about me. And here's what I want to encourage you to do. Wherever you work, wherever you live, whatever you do, I want to encourage you to find a way to do that yourself. Tell the people that are in your circle of influence about who God is and about what God has done in your life. Learn to point them to Jesus. That's what we're about as a church, and I hope that's what you're about individually, that you're learning to point them to Jesus, because in your world, in that professional environment, wherever you work or live, the way to break the code of silence when it comes to God and spiritual things is to tell them that you know that you are living in daily dependence upon God. Like Joseph, you can let them know that your confidence is in God. It's not in your credentials. It's not in your talent. It's not on your past success. Your confidence is in God. I mean, if you were really sick, wouldn't you talk about God? If you lost everything that you have, wouldn't you talk about Him? If your children were sick and dying, wouldn't you talk about God? If you were in prison? Why is it that we're silent when we prosper? It's difficult to bring God into the equation when life is good. And if that's the case for you, you're failing the prosperity test. And the reality is most people do. But you don't have to. Be creative in ways to find, a way to say, hey, I'm trusting in God. My faith is in Him, it's not in me. See, Joseph saved the entire nation of Egypt and the surrounding area, and you never once see him using his power or success for personal gain. He does not boast. He does not brag. I mean, another lesson we learn from Joseph's story is that God does not bless us just for us. I want you to remember, as we think about being generous ourselves, we are blessed to be a blessing. Another way of saying it is, we're to be a river, not a reservoir. We're to be a channel, not a clog. I mean, we're to be generous in thinking of others. We're blessed to be a blessing, and Joseph's going to be an amazing blessing. We're going to hear more about that next week, but I'm telling you, Joseph's story is so rich with amazing truths that we can apply to our lives, and that's what I hope you do. When we hear these stories, why do we study these stories that have been preserved for 3,000 and 4,000 years? Why do we study that? Because we can learn and apply truths to our lives that can make a difference in the way we live. Next week, we're going to see how Joseph handled it when the opportunity for revenge was staring him right in the face. And I hope you'll be here for that. Invite a friend and make plans to be here as we wrap up this 3-week series. But before we go today, I want to remind you one more time, the recurring theme that keeps surfacing again and again in Joseph's story is the fact that the Lord was with Joseph. The Lord was with Joseph. Even as an abandoned brother, the Lord was with him. Even as a slave, the Lord was with him. Even as a prisoner, the Lord was with Joseph. And Joseph could have seen his situation as hopeless. He could have felt helpless. Instead, he remembered what we so often forget. And this is the lesson that I hope you will take with you for this day. And this is the lesson I hope you will remember. Joseph remembered what we so often and so easily forget, and that is that our God is faithful. Our God is faithful. We can have big faith in our big God because He is faithful. That's why Joseph had such big faith. And I ask you, are you facing a seemingly hopeless situation at work or at school or at home or wherever you find yourself this week? I just want to remind you that you can have big faith in God because our God is faithful. And just remember how God turned Joseph's situation around. And He can do the same for you. And He can do the same for you because He is faithful. He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. And so whatever it is that you're going through today, just remember, you can be faithful to Him. You can count on it. He will be faithful to you. Let's pray together. Lord Jesus, I don't know where a story like this, a message like this lands with every person here today and hearing this message online or elsewhere. I'm thankful, though, that your Spirit can take a message like this and apply it to each of our hearts right where we're living. And I have a feeling that some are maybe in the pit or in the valley and they're wondering, where's God in all of this? And they're wondering, maybe even on the mountaintop, they feel, that sense of independence. And yet in all of these cases, Lord, I just want to pray that you will help every single one of us to just stop right now and decide we're going to put God between our circumstances and us. We're going to see life through that perspective. We're going to allow faith to shape the way we see everything. We're going to live like you are with us because you are, just like you promised. And so as we go from this place, and after we've worshiped some more, we're going to sing about your faithfulness, but we want to remember. We want to remember it beyond the doors of this church. We want to remember it as we walk into our Monday mornings and into our lives, and into our families, and into our jobs, and into the school. We want to remember that we serve a great God who is faithful every moment of every day, and we are thankful for that this day. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.